past July 14th marked the 200th anniversary of the fall of the Bastille. This was the beginning of the French Revolution, an event which catapulted France into the modern age and which had enormous significance for the subsequent development of the West. I'm Julius Smetona. This is What Catholics Believe. For many, the French Revolution marked the end of the oppression of the working classes by an oppressive and burdensome aristocracy. The battle cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity established once and for all the new political and civil rights of man. On the other hand, there are those who believe that the French Revolution signaled the death of Catholic civilization and ushered in an age which would ultimately produce the Antichrist. With us today to discuss the French Revolution and communism are three Roman Catholic priests who reject the Second Vatican Council and celebrate the traditional Latin Mass exclusively. Father William Jenkins, pastor of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus Church in Cleveland, Ohio. Father Donald Sanborn, pastor of St. Pius X Church in the Detroit area. And Father Clarence Kelly, spiritual director of St. Joseph's Novitiate in Round Top, New York. Reverend Fathers, welcome to What Catholics Believe.
Thank you, Jim.
Father Sanborn, what is the significance of the French Revolution? What really happened?
It was the overturning of legitimate authority, and it was the establishment of a godless state by people who were frenzied with an idea of completely eliminating God from human life.
Is there, as such, an official church position on the French Revolution? Have any popes ever commented on it?
Yes, Pope Pius VI condemned the principles of the French Revolution during the time of the French Revolution.
Are you referring to the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity?
The Declaration of the Rights of Man, the general principles of a godless state and the overthrow of proper authority.
What were these principles, then, of the French Revolution, and what was so bad about them?
Well, the French Revolution sought to take authority from its legitimate possessors, which in this case was King Louis XVI, and say that authority is in the people. And this is the basis of communism. Now, while it is true that it is up to the people to choose a form of government, it is not true that the authority comes from the people. St. Paul says all legitimate authority comes from God. And that is the Catholic position. So no matter what kind of government you have, whether it should be a monarchy, whether it should be a republic, even a democracy, the authority does not come from below, but from above. And even if people elect their officials, the authority that they have over the people comes from God.
What is the consequence, then, of this authority coming from below rather than from above?
It makes the state not a correctly constituted entity that depends on God, but rather it makes it just a mass of human beings, just like an anthill. As a matter of fact, an anthill has much more structure than what the French Revolution would like to see for humanity. It is just a mass of humanity that it's a mob. The French Revolution wanted to see mob rule, and it is the establishment of mob rule for nations.
Mm-hmm. Father Kelly, we often hear about liberty, equality, and fraternity, and these are principles which are seem to be greatly admired. What is the Catholic view of these principles, understood in the context of the French Revolution?
Well, those are, in the mouths of French revolutionaries, propaganda words. They imply that the people did not have liberty before the revolution, that they did not have a certain equality, and that they didn't have a fraternity. The truth of the matter is, what the French revolutionaries were trying to establish was a license to do anything that you wanted to do, so that the state, in turn, could do anything it wanted to do. equality, so-called equality, simply meant that the hard-working man could be deprived of the fruits of his labor to give to anyone else. They could just simply go in and deprive anyone at any time of property rights. That's what that really means. The equality means no property rights. You do not have a right to keep what you have earned. And as far as fraternity goes, the fraternity that existed at the time of the French Revolution, when it got into full swing, was the Brotherhood of Hell. It was based upon ruthless, satanic-type principles whereby if you were even suspected, for example, of being opposed to the thoughts of the revolutionaries, they could simply come in and kill you. But I think you have to go a step further, and the step further is that these principles, so-called principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, are like the principles used by the communists. In other words, they don't really believe these things. Communists are like very high-class gangsters. The difference between, say, a communist regime in Red China today, or even in the Soviet Union using somewhat different tactics, and the mafia, is that the mafia at least admit that they're gangsters. The communists, they attempt to cloak their ruthless exploitation of all men under the guise of liberty, equality, and fraternity. So I think you have to look at that. First of all, you have to look at what they mean by these propaganda words, and then you also have to understand that there are very powerful people who are behind these revolutionaries and who are benefiting from it, just as the oligarchy in Red China today benefits mightily from the so-called equality of the masses. Those Communist Party officials are quite rich and quite secure. They have the best homes, the best food, the best cars. They have many servants and multiple homes. But they are not honest like the mafia. They pretend that they are living in those conditions for the sake of the masses, whereas ordinary gangsters come out and say that they're doing it for gain.
You know, you mentioned these principles, and I think everyday events show that they're very much alive today. For instance, recently the Supreme Court ruled that one may burn the flag, and the argument is, well, if you deny someone the right to burn the flag, you're denying a just form of expression. Would you see a parallel between this?
I don't know if there's a parallel, but I would say that it's a manifest absurdity for the Supreme Court of the United States to say that you can burn the symbol of the country itself is almost saying that you can attack the country, because the symbol of the country in some way embodies the principles of society. I would say that there is a certain type of masochism in a decision like that, and the United States is certainly engaged in a certain type of self-destruction. And I suppose this absurd and sinful decision of the Supreme Court that you could burn the flag is simply symptomatic of what is going on in our society, which is disintegration and self-destruction.
Father Jenkins, much is made about the terror. Perhaps it's not readily known that many priests and nuns were executed during the terror, and during the terror itself, the holy sacrifice of the Mass was prohibited from being celebrated. What could you tell us about this?
The terror is an episode in the French Revolution which has drawn a lot of, at least names in history books, but is not really elaborated upon too much. The revolution really was all about the terror, though. The revolution, in its principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, basically meant, as Father Sanborn and Father Kelly have explained so well, just total anarchy. That was what they meant by liberty. However, Robespierre and Saint-Just had a purpose for the terror. Nesta Webster points out in her book on the French Revolution that documents were found after the guillotining of Robespierre and Saint-Just, which indicate that the two of them had hit upon a plan to turn France into a socialist society. But they decided that the population of France was too great for the land area at the time, and so they determined to destroy up to 10 million French people. And they did this indiscriminately, like I believe it was Carrier who would herd peasants from the fields out to the river, bind them together, float them out on barges, and then sink the barges. People he had never seen before, people who had never committed a crime. But they had to die so that France could be transformed into a socialist society. Of course, we see that the revolution devoured its children in Robespierre and Saint-Just, but it is such a mockery for Robespierre to have led a procession into Notre Dame to honor the goddess of reason, and then, in the midst of this bloodshed, in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity, destroy hundreds of thousands of innocent lives.
It's a real mystery to me why the French people would ever want to celebrate this section of their history. I mean, this is where France was given over to maniacs, frenzied maniacs. They were so maniacal that they would not use the Jack, Queen, and King of playing cards because they were royalty. I mean, these people are sick. These were the people running France. These were the people doing the guillotining, and this was the government of France. They got a prostitute from the Comédie Française and got her and put her in a costume and put her on a throne in the Cathedral of Paris, Notre Dame de Paris, which was built under the eyes of saints in the Middle Ages, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure, St. Louis IX, and they put her in there and worshipped her as the goddess of reason. These are sick people. Why any country would be proud of this hour of its history is beyond me. They should want to cover it up and celebrate something else.
To show the extent of the degradation, ordinary people would sit around the guillotine and cheer when the heads fell, when the heads were held up before them, dripping blood. As I recall, there were only two noticeable moments of silence when heads were held up. One was when they held up the head of the king, Louis XVI, and the other was when they held up the head of the monster, Robespierre. Marat probably would have been guillotined if he'd lived long enough. He was a demon incarnate. But he was stabbed to death by a young woman who had determined that he was butchering her country, and she was later led to the guillotine for doing it.
You're watching, what's the relation between communism and the French Revolution?
As I said, the French Revolution reduced a nation to a mob. That's effectively what it did. Communism feeds off that. Communism is the complete equalization and socialization of a whole nation, whereby individual rights, property rights, families, the small structures of society, small businesses, even large businesses, are completely obliterated, and the state acts as one big family, one big corporation, one big farm, one big everything. And every aspect of your life is controlled by the state. Mm-hmm. That is only possible if you break down all of the God-given institutions of men, which is primarily the church, secondarily the family, the authority of the father over his family. If you break that down and say every single person is equal before the state, and the state doesn't even look at families, doesn't look at the church, doesn't look at God, it just looks at individuals, that is the basis of communism.
Is there an official church position on communism?
It's condemned. And the Catholic Church has been the one institution in the world that has condemned it more than anyone else. Over and over again. The first condemnation was in 1836 by Pope Gregory the 16th.
Well, you know, there's a very interesting quote by Pope Pius XI, and I believe the quote says that no one may be a sincere socialist and true Catholic. Now, in the June 20th, 1983 issue of Newsweek magazine, there was an article which began with that quote, and said, "No one except for the Pope." And they said that John Paul II may be termed as the first socialist Pope. Now, it seems that since the Second Vatican Council, we have not heard such striking condemnations of communism, and at the same time, we're seeing more democracy in the Soviet Union. There's elections now. Could it be that communism is changing and the church position is changing as well?
No. communism has not changed to begin with. Gorbachev, for all of his liberalization, is a Leninist, and he said it. He believes in Lenin. Lenin is a monster. And this is not the first time that the Soviet Union has become liberal. It became liberal under Stalin for different reasons, under Khrushchev for different reasons, and now under Gorbachev. No, there's no change in communism, and communism, by Lenin's and Marx's own words, can do anything to gain its own ends. Lie, cheat, steal, do anything to gain its own ends. So we can pay no attention to that.
You know, it seems that before the Second Vatican Council, there were no diplomatic relations whatsoever between the Vatican and communist states. Now, there is a recent article which said that John Paul II is negotiating with Poland to open up official relations. What is the significance of this event, and does it reflect the new attitude of the post-Vatican II Church towards communism? Father Kelly.
I think it does reflect a dramatic change which has occurred in the Church since the changes of Vatican II. Such a dramatic change, in fact, that it has brought about the existence of a new church. That, it might sound startling to people to hear that, but this new religion that has been created is essentially a different religion from the religion that we believe, for example, as Roman Catholics. The religion that we believe and profess is the religion of the saints and the popes handed down for the last 2,000 years. This new religion is dramatically different. It has a different idea of God. It has a different idea of the incarnate Word of God. It has a different idea of what is the mission of the church, what is the purpose of the redemption, the reason for creation. It has an idea that is directed toward this world. It is not directed toward the eternal salvation of souls, and therefore there is a preoccupation with this world. There is a preoccupation with the good things of this world, and a failure to acknowledge that the spirit of the world is inimical to the spirit of Christ. And so this notion, this attitude, this view has brought about a kind of uncontrollable lust to accommodate to this world, to accommodate to the politics of the world and the morality of the world. And hence we have now this very, very soft view of communism. The Pope should be condemning communism. He should be in the forefront of condemning the horrible monstrosities that have occurred in China. He should be warning the people about this wolf Gorbachev in the clothing of a sheep. The Soviet Union is in very serious financial difficulty now. There is great advantage to Gorbachev pretending to be a sheep. He is pretending to be a sheep because he needs a tremendous influx of financial aid. And what does the West do? The West forgets the lessons of the last 70 years, that these are ruthless, brutal murderers who happen to be in need of an influx of money and so forth and so on. But as soon as they put on the garments of a sheep, everyone lets their guard down, and believe it or not, Gorbachev is proclaimed to be some type of great hero. Imagine, for example, if someone said that there were good Nazis. To say there is a good communist is equivalent to saying that there is a good Nazi.
You know, there was a famous quote attributed to Lenin, who said that what matters if 3/4 of the world perish, if the remaining quarter of the world is communist. And considering that quote, there was, how do you react to this attempted condemnation of communism by a number of bishops at the Second Vatican Council, which was squelched and nothing came of it? What happened there, Father Jenkins?
Well, there was a petition taken up, and I think signed by 475 bishops at Vatican II, for the council to condemn communism. Now remember, this council was called specifically to deal with the problems the Church was facing in the world today. And so you think of all the problems they would discuss, it would be communism. Such was not the case. The petition that was delivered to Monsignor Glorieux was simply put aside, and he later admitted that he had put it in a drawer. and used the excuse that it arrived too late. Well, the bishops who delivered it to him knew that it had not arrived too late. There was a conspiracy to prevent the council from condemning communism. Supposedly it was due to an agreement which allowed certain bishops to come from communist countries to the Vatican Council, so that the council would not condemn communism. Whatever it may be, this is an unforgivable sin. There is nothing but a footnote which condemns communism in the vaguest terms. You see, even look at John Paul II's anti-communism. It is totally different from Cardinal Mindszenty's anti-communism. Mindzenty was cast into prison, held there for years, tortured. Cardinal Wojtyla rather came up through the ranks. He was promoted in the church in Poland. What was the difference? Why did the communists in Hungary treat Cardinal Mindzenty one way, and the communists in Poland treat Cardinal Wojtyla, who became John Paul II, another way? And I think the difference is this. Cardinal Mindzenty would never deal with the communists as though they were a legitimate government of his country. He would do nothing but denounce them as a bunch of cutthroats and pirates. But Cardinal Wojtyla would deal with the communists as though they were a legitimate government. And even today, John Paul II will not condemn communism as such. He'll talk about the abuses, but to condemn communism, that he will not do. He is not anti-communist.
Father Sanborn, what was this Vatican-Moscow agreement we sometimes hear about?
The first one to be soft on communism was John the 23rd. And he actually invited Khrushchev's nephew or niece, and to the shock of Rome at the time, because Pius XII had said, anyone who has anything to do with the Communist Party is automatically excommunicated. Then Paul VI flew the Communist Chinese flag from the Vatican when the Communist Chinese came to see him, and actually praised the Cultural Revolution in China. What the Vatican has done since the election of John the 23rd and Paul VI is start to deal with the communists and to break down its opposition to communism. It's just clear. As a matter of fact, it is the United States that has been attacked by Paul VI and by John Paul II, much more than Russia or China. It's the so-called rich United States, the oppressor, the imperialist. During the Vietnam War, it was Paul VI constantly attacking the United States, not the communists in Vietnam. And the same is true now. We are constantly getting digs by John Paul II about what we're doing, whereas Russia, which is the supreme oppressor of not only the Catholic Church but religion in general, that goes off scot-free.
Father Kelly, in 1 minute, what is your view of the situation we find ourselves today, the political situation?
I think we are in a very dire situation. I think that's true with regard to the problems we face in the church and the problems we face in society. I think there is the auto-destruction of the institutions of the Catholic Church, and I don't think it's an accident. I think that the bishops and the cardinals are engaged in a program to change the Catholic Church so that it lacks any salt, as it were, that it does no longer represent what they wish to attain anyway, is that it doesn't represent anymore our Lord Jesus Christ, but rather it represents a kind of force for the amalgamation of mankind. And I think that that's what the theologians are engaged in, and I think that that's what imperils this country. I think there is a desire to reach an accommodation with the communists, and ultimately perhaps to establish a world government to blend all societies, and perhaps that is a part of the explanation for the so-called liberalization in the Soviet Union and in Red China. I think that the United States is in very, very severe trouble, and if the people don't wake up soon, they may not have an opportunity to wake up at all.
Reverend Fathers, thank you very much for being